It was then that the side door opened, and a man with an austere demeanor wrapped in a dark overcoat entered the room. On his shoulder, perched with an almost supernatural stillness, was Edgar, a raven with ebony plumage and eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. A murmur swept through the room, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. The trainer, with a calculated gesture, placed Edgar on the evidence table right next to the documents that would seal Elias's fate. The silence that followed was almost palpable, broken only by the rustling of the raven's wings as he adjusted himself. His black eyes fixed on the papers, and then, with startling precision, Edgar tilted his head, let out a loud, repetitive caw, and forcefully pecked at the signature that Dr. Elias Vance insisted was authentic. The sound echoed through the courtroom, a gothic revelation that dismantled the charade, exposing a truth no human expert had managed to unearth. The silence that followed Edgar's peck was not one of reverence, but of paralyzing shock. It wasn't the sound of the judge's gavel that echoed now, but that of truth, raw and unexpected, delivered by a raven's beak. Dr. Elias Vance, so confident in his demeanor moments before, now seemed to have aged a decade in an instant. His face, previously tinged with calculated indignation, drained of color, leaving behind a chilling pallor that betrayed his panic. His eyes, previously fixed on the judge with a rehearsed plea, now darted to the raven as if Edgar were not a bird, but a herald of his own personal hell. Judge Dr. Helena Almeida, a woman of usually impassive demeanor, leaned slightly forward, her glasses slipping a little down her nose. Her voice, when it finally broke through the veil of disbelief, was a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible. What was that?" she asked, not to the trainer, but to the rarefied air of the courtroom, as if seeking an explanation from a dimension that defied logic. The trainer, the man in the overcoat, remained unperturbed. His deep, calm eyes observed the scene with a serenity that contrasted violently with the emotional chaos that was settling in. He made no move to retrieve Edgar, who now, his mission apparently accomplished, adjusted himself on the table, his black eyes fixed on Elias Vance, as if judging him. "Your Honor," the prosecutor's voice, Dr. Ricardo Mendez, finally made itself heard, charged with renewed urgency. "I believe the bird has just exposed the fraud we've been trying to prove for weeks. The signature Dr. Vance insists is authentic. Edgar has unmasked it." A more intense buzz began to form, but it was again silenced by the judge's severe gaze. She struck the gavel, this time with force, the sound reverberating like thunder. "Order! Order in this court! Dr. Vance, do you have anything to say about this?" Elias Vance tried to speak, but the words seemed caught in his throat. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water, his dignity crumbling under the weight of everyone's gaze, and more importantly, under Edgar's penetrating stare. Truth often needs no words to be felt, and there, in that moment, truth had black wings and a sharp beak. At the back of the room, seated in the first row of the public gallery, a woman watched the scene with a complex mixture of fascination and terror. Clara, Elias's business partner, the mastermind behind the betrayal and the theft of the $1 million prototype, felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew Edgar. No, not this Edgar, but the legend surrounding him. Rumors of an extraordinarily intelligent raven, trained for specific missions, whispered in the darkest circles of the tech elite. She had dismissed it as folklore, a story to scare children. But there he was, real, and dismantling Elias's charade, a pawn she herself had manipulated. Clara's eyes narrowed. Elias was a problem, yes, but a controllable one. Edgar, however, was an unpredictable variable, a wild card that threatened to destabilize her meticulously orchestrated plan. The key, the damned key, She had swallowed it, yes, but not forever. There was a plan to retrieve it, a plan that depended on time and discretion. But if Edgar was capable of unmasking a signature, what else might he be capable of? The trainer, noticing Elias's panic, finally spoke, his voice grave and calm. "Your Honor, Edgar is a raven trained to identify patterns and anomalies. He was presented with samples of the authentic signature and the supposed forgery. His reaction is a clear indication that the signature in question does not match the original pattern." The judge frowned. "And how can we trust the accuracy of a bird, however trained?" "His intelligence is unquestionable, Your Honor, and his motivation pure. He seeks truth, not victory." The trainer's statement, though poetic, did not offer a solid legal basis. However, the visual impact of Edgar's demonstration was undeniable. The room was in an uproar, lawyers whispering, the press in a silent frenzy, trying to capture every detail of that surreal scene. Clara felt a knot in her stomach. That raven wasn't just an animal, it was a tool, a weapon, and it seemed to be wielded by a force she couldn't comprehend. If he unmasked Elias, who would be next? A cold, sharp pang of fear pierced her facade of calm. She was certain no one knew about the key, no one, but the way Edgar looked at Elias with that almost human intensity made a terrible doubt begin to gnaw at her certainty. The prototype, buried in a secret location, awaited the right moment to be unearthed and sold. The key, hidden within her own body, was the guarantee that only she would have access to the fortune. But if Edgar, the detective raven, was capable of seeing through human lies, what would stop him from seeing through hers? The tension in the courtroom was palpable, but for Clara, the real battle was just beginning, and the adversary was not a prosecutor or a judge, but a raven with black eyes and ancient wisdom, a herald of a justice that flew above the laws of men. The game had changed, and the sound of the judge's gavel, declaring a brief recess, seemed a prelude to an approaching storm, laden with black feathers and unearthed secrets. The recess, which for many in the courtroom was a momentary relief from tension, transformed into a particular hell for Clara. The buzz intensified. Voices that were once whispers now rose into a chorus of astonishment and speculation. She barely heard. Her mind spun around a single black point, a point with wings and piercing eyes. Edgar. That raven was not an aberration of nature, but a calculated force, a predator of truths that seemed to have stepped out of a nightmare. Elias Vance, the disposable pawn, was now just a detail, a minor problem. The real danger, Clara realized with a chill, had black wings and a sharp beak. She stood up, her movements stiff, as if her body were under a spell. She needed air, space to think, to readjust the pieces of a game that suddenly seemed to have turned against her in a brutal and unexpected way. In the hallway, the commotion was even greater. Reporters jostled, cell phones in hand, the story of the detective raven exploding in real time across all media. Clara slipped away, trying to go unnoticed, but she felt Edgar's eyes, even from a distance, piercing her. A cold paranoia began to set in, eroding her facade of calm. The key, the damned key, she had swallowed it. A desperate act, yes, but effective. No one, absolutely no one, knew. Only she and the darkness of her own body. It was the guarantee, the life insurance for the buried prototype, for the fortune that awaited her. But what if Edgar knew? The idea was absurd, illogical. A raven couldn't know something like that. But he had unmasked a signature with a precision that defied reason and human expertise. What else could he see? Clara felt a cold sweat trickle down her neck. The legend of Edgar, which she had dismissed as folklore to scare children, now took on sinister contours. It wasn't just intelligence. It was something more, an almost supernatural perception, a connection to a truth that transcended the visible. She remembered the whispers in the company hallways before the betrayal, Stories of a raven that saw things, that felt the truth. She had laughed. Now the laughter was caught in her throat, transformed into a silent scream of terror. She spotted Edgar's trainer, the man in the overcoat, standing in a secluded corner of the hallway, observing the confusion with disturbing calm. Edgar was on his shoulder again, his black eyes fixed on Clara for a brief instant, before looking away. It was just an instant, a blink of an eye, but it was enough for Clara to feel that she had been scanned, assessed, and perhaps discovered. A feeling of vulnerability she hadn't felt in years. She hesitated. She wanted to confront him, demand explanations, but the words died in her mouth. What would she say? "Does your bird know about the key I swallowed?" It would be the stupidest confession of her life, the ruin of her entire plan. She held back, but the tension was almost unbearable. The trainer seemed oblivious to her presence, but Clara felt that he knew, that he and Edgar were in a synchronicity that transcended human communication, a partnership operating on a different plane from anything she had ever encountered. The recess was ending. The judge's gavel would soon call everyone back. Clara needed to act, but how? Her plan was crumbling, and with each passing second, Edgar's threat became more real, more imminent. She needed to retrieve that key. She couldn't wait. The prototype was too valuable, and the risk of Edgar, or whoever was behind him, discovering her deepest secret was unbearable. She returned to the courtroom, her heart pounding erratically, a drum of panic in her chest. The judge was already in her seat, her expression still serious, but with a new curiosity in her eyes, a spark of something that seemed to be admiration and perplexity. Elias Vance was back in his chair, a shell of a man, his career and reputation in ruins, the image of an unmasked traitor. The prosecutor, Dr. Mendez, seemed invigorated, his gaze fixed on the trainer and Edgar, as if expecting a new trick, a new revelation. The trainer, with the same calm as before, walked to the evidence table. Edgar, on his shoulder, seemed more alert, his head swiveling, his eyes catching every movement in the room, every held breath. Silence returned, heavy, foreshadowing something grand, something that would change the course of that trial forever. The judge struck the gavel. "Order! Dr. Mendez, do you have any further evidence to present?" The prosecutor smiled, a contained but victorious smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, Your Honor. With the court's permission, we would like to present evidence that, I believe, will not only seal Dr. Vance's fraud, but also reveal the true mastermind behind this entire conspiracy." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, colder and sharper than any other. He was talking about her. It couldn't be. No one knew. The trainer then made a move that paralyzed Clara, freezing the blood in her veins. He approached the evidence table and, with a gentle gesture, placed Edgar not on the table, but on the floor, right in the center of the open space between the prosecutor's and the defense attorney's tables. Edgar didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on the audience, sweeping faces one by one, with an almost human intensity. And then Edgar's eyes stopped. They fixed on Clara, a gaze that seemed to see through her skin, through her bones, directly into the secret she held within her body. Clara felt the air thin in her lungs, a silent asphyxiation. It was as if the raven was reading her soul, exposing every lie, every betrayal. The trainer leaned in and whispered something to Edgar. The raven cawed, a low sound, but laden with intent, a grim omen. Then, with surprising agility, Edgar took flight. Not to the trainer's shoulder, not to the evidence table. He flew directly to the judge's seat. Dr. Almeida recoiled, surprised but not frightened, her eyes wide. Edgar landed softly on the wooden bar in front of her seat, mere inches from her hands. The entire courtroom held its breath. What would he do now? Edgar tilted his head, his black eyes fixed on the judge. And then, with a quick and deliberate movement, he opened his beak. There was no core, no peck. There was only a small metallic object gleaming under the courtroom lights that fell with a soft clink onto the judge's lap. A key. Clara felt her world collapse. The key. The damned key. How? How did he have it? She had swallowed it. The room erupted in a chaos of murmurs and exclamations. The judge picked up the object, her eyes wide with astonishment, and held it up for all to see. It was a small key made of an unusual metal with a distinctive engraving. The key to the vault, to the hiding place, to the prototype, the irrefutable proof. Clara felt a scream rise in her throat, but no sound came out. Her face was white as snow, her eyes fixed on the key, and then on Edgar, who now, his mission accomplished, flew back to the trainer's shoulder, a grim herald of relentless justice, flying above the laws of men and unearthing secrets from the deepest hiding place. The metallic clink of the key in Judge Almeida's lap resonated like a funeral bell in Clara's ears. It wasn't just the sound of an object falling, but the sound of her world collapsing, of every pillar of her meticulous conspiracy crumbling to dust. The key, the damned key. She had swallowed it, she was sure. A desperate act, yes, but an act she believed to be infallible. No one, absolutely no one, could have access to it. It was her insurance, her guarantee, her ticket to an incalculable fortune. But there it was, gleaming under the cold courtroom lights, a small piece of metal that weighed more than all the gold in the world. The judge held it up, her eyes wide, disbelief mixed with profound shock. The prosecutor, Dr. Mendez, had a widening smile, no longer contained, but exultant, like that of a hunter finally cornering his prey. Clara felt the air thin in her lungs, a silent asphyxiation that prevented her from screaming, from breathing. Her entire body trembled, but she forced herself to remain still, to maintain her facade, even if she was in pieces inside. Her eyes, previously fixed on the key, now turned to Edgar. The raven, on the trainer's shoulder, seemed to observe her with an almost cruel intelligence, as if savoring the moment of her ruin. How? The question echoed in her mind, a silent scream of despair. How did he have it? She had swallowed it. The memory was vivid, the metallic taste, the sensation of something descending her throat. It was a secret kept in the darkness of her own body, a place where the light of law and logic could not reach. But Edgar, the detective raven, seemed to operate on a different plane, a plane where secrets could not hide. The buzz in the courtroom exploded into an uproar. Reporters stood up, cameras flashed, cell phones recorded. The story of the raven that unmasked truths had just gained its most unbelievable chapter. The judge struck the gavel forcefully, trying to restore order, but the authority of her gesture seemed small compared to the surreal spectacle unfolding. Order! Order in this court! Judge Almeida's voice finally asserted itself, charged with a gravity Clara had never heard before. She held the key between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were an ancient relic or proof of a miracle. Dr. Mendez, can you explain how this evidence was obtained? The prosecutor approached the table, his demeanor now serious, but with victory etched into every line of his face. Your Honor, as the premise of our investigation suggested, Dr. Clara Vasconcelos, in an act of desperation to conceal the key to the vault where the prototype was hidden, swallowed it. However, what she didn't know is that nature has its own ways of revealing the truth. Clara felt a chill. He knew she had swallowed it. But how? During the recess, Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, his voice calm and controlled. Dr. Vasconcelos, under the extreme stress of the situation and the pressure of her own guilt, became unwell. She briefly withdrew to the court restrooms. Our collaborator, Mr. Arthur, Edgar's trainer, who was already aware of the legend that Dr. Vasconcelos had disposed of the key in an unusual way, was observing. Clara felt her blood run cold, the restroom, the malaise, the nausea that had overcome her. She remembered now with terrible clarity that moment of weakness, of vulnerability, when her body, betraying her, had expelled what she thought was safely hidden. Edgar, the prosecutor gestured to the Raven, who seemed to nod from his perch on the trainer's shoulder. With his unparalleled visual acuity and instinct, was with Mr. Arthur. He observed Dr. Vasconcelos, and when she, in her moment of distress, vomited the key, Edgar discreetly retrieved it. Irrefutable proof, Your Honor, that not only confirms the prototype's location, but also the extent of the accused's desperation to conceal her crime. The humiliation was overwhelming. It wasn't just the key, but the manner in which it had been obtained, the violation of her privacy, the exposure of her most intimate and degrading moment. She had been watched, hunted, and her best-kept secret, vomited in a public restroom, had been retrieved by a Raven. The image was grotesque, the truth indigestible. The judge, after a moment of stunned silence, finally spoke, her voice now charged with unwavering authority. Dr. Vasconcelos, in light of this evidence and the explanation provided by the prosecution, the court considers the key as material evidence. This key will be submitted for forensic analysis to confirm its authenticity and its connection to the prototype's vault. However, the manner in which it was obtained, though unusual, does not invalidate its relevance. I ask Dr. Vasconcelos to prepare to testify. Clara couldn't speak. Her throat was dry, her voice caught somewhere between terror and shame. She looked at the trainer, at Arthur. He didn't look victorious, just calm, his eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't decipher. And Edgar, the Raven, the herald of justice, tilted his head, as if reading her thoughts, unraveling every layer of her exposed soul. The game was over. There were no more cards to play, no more secrets to hide. The key, which she thought was her salvation, had become the instrument of her condemnation. And truth, like a black-winged raven, had flown above the laws of men, unearthing her deepest secret, not from a hiding place in the earth, but from the depths of her own body. The sound of the judge's gavel, closing the session, was no longer a prelude to a storm, but the final sound of a sentence already pronounced. The sound of Judge Almeida's gavel, closing the session, was no longer a prelude to a storm, but the final sound of a sentence already pronounced. For Clara, it was the dry click of a door closing forever, the last nail in her coffin of lies. The world spun, but she was motionless, petrified at the center of her own disaster. The courtroom lights, once cold and impersonal, now seemed incandescent spotlights, burning her skin, exposing every nerve, every flaw. The humiliation was a heavy, suffocating cloak, denser than any fabric, colder than any metal. She felt the stares, hundreds of them. The reporters, the curious, the lawyers, even the security guards, everyone saw her not as Dr. Clara Vasconcelos, the brilliant mind behind VanceTech, but as the woman who swallowed a key and vomited it, only for it to be retrieved by a raven. The image was grotesque, the truth indigestible, and shame, a nauseating wave, threatened to swallow her whole. Her stomach churned again, a phantom echo of that degrading moment in the restroom. Dr. Mendez, the prosecutor, no longer needed to smile. Victory was etched onto his face, a contained but profound satisfaction. He had unraveled the mystery, not with the cold logic of the law, but with the help of a bird and an almost predatory observation. He approached the judge, the key still in her hands, and exchanged a few words in a low voice, inaudible to Clara, but laden with meaning. The key, that small piece of metal, was now the center of the universe, the pivot of her ruin. Her lawyer, Dr. Silva, was pale. His eyes, once confident, now displayed, contained despair. He tried to approach Clara, but she recoiled imperceptibly. There was nothing to say. There was no strategy, no defense. The game was over, and she had lost in a spectacularly humiliating fashion. He knew it, she knew it, and the entire courtroom knew it. Edgar, the Raven, was still on Arthur, the trainer's shoulder. He didn't caw, he didn't move. He just watched her, his eyes black and deep, like wells of ancient wisdom. Clara felt a shiver. He wasn't just an animal. He was a herald, a judge, an executioner. He had been the instrument of her downfall, the messenger of a truth she thought she had buried in the depths of her own body. The legend of the raven that unearths secrets had become her cruelest reality. Judge Almeida, after the brief conversation with the prosecutor, struck the gavel again, this time with unwavering conviction. The court will recess for 1 hour. After the recess, Dr. Vasconcelos will be called to testify. Dr. Silva, prepare your client. Dr. Mendez, ensure that the Keys forensic analysis begins immediately. This court will require preliminary results before the end of the day. The order was clear, but the words barely reached Clara. Testify. What would she say? How could she deny the undeniable? The key was there, the story of how it was obtained was there, and the truth, raw and stark, was there, hovering over her like a storm cloud. The buzz in the courtroom exploded again as soon as the judge rose. Reporters crowded, microphones were extended, camera flashes blinded. Clara felt like a cornered animal, with no escape, no hiding place. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled, refusing to obey. Dr. Silva had to help her, holding her arm, guiding her out of the room, away from the stares, the whispers, the humiliation. As she was led out, her eyes met Arthur's. He didn't look victorious, not even satisfied. There was a sadness in his gaze, a resignation, as if he knew that truth, though necessary, was not always beautiful. And Edgar on his shoulder tilted his head, an almost human gesture, as if bidding farewell to a lost soul. In the hallway, far from the courtroom arena, the air was no less thin. Clara leaned against the cold wall, her face white, her breathing shallow. Dr. Silva tried to speak, but she cut him off with a weak gesture. "There's nothing to say, Dr. Silva. There's nothing to do." Her voice was a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible. The strength she had maintained for so long, the facade of control, had completely disintegrated. The key, the damned key. It had been her last hope, her last secret, and now it was her verdict. The forensic analysis would confirm its authenticity, its connection to the vault, and then the prototype. The treasure she had buried, the future she had stolen, would be unearthed, exposed, and with it, the full extent of her betrayal. The 1-hour recess felt like an eternity, and at the same time, a blink of an eye. It was the time she had left to breathe, to prepare for the inevitable. But how does one prepare for the end of the world? For the fall of everything she had built, everything she had believed in? Clara closed her eyes, but the images persisted, the key gleaming in the judge's lap, Edgar's black eyes, the nausea of humiliation. Truth, like a black-winged raven, had flown above the laws of men, unearthing her deepest secret, not from a hiding place in the earth, but from the depths of her own body. And now she was about to reap what she had sown, under the relentless gaze of justice. The hallway, far from the courtroom arena, offered no refuge. The air was no less thin, but the cold wall against her back was a chilling reminder of reality. Clara clung to it, her face white as paper, her breathing shallow and ragged. Dr. Silva, her lawyer, tried to speak, but she cut him off with a weak gesture, her voice a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible. "There's nothing to say, Dr. Silva. There's nothing to do." The strength she had maintained for so long, the facade of control, had completely disintegrated. That hour of recess was not a relief, but a torture. Each passing minute was a nail hammered into her coffin of lies, a cruel reminder of inevitability. She felt time slipping through her fingers, taking with it any trace of hope. Dr. Silva, a man of quick wit and sharp strategies, was visibly shaken. He tried, desperately, to build a new line of defense, but his words were a distant hum to Clara. "We can argue about invasion of privacy, the unethical way the evidence was obtained," he murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. How does one argue against truth when it is so grotesquely exposed? For Clara, the world had shrunk to a single point, the key, the damned key. It had been her last hope, her last secret, the guarantee that the prototype would remain buried, untouched until the right moment. She had believed in the inviolability of her own body, in the cunning of her choice. Swallowing the key, a desperate act, yes, but one that seemed infallible. Who would look there? Who would even dare to imagine? The irony was cruel. She, the brilliant mind behind Vancetech, outsmarted by a raven and the keen observation of a trainer. Her mind, once a labyrinth of strategies and plans, was now a battleground of humiliating memories. The restroom, the overwhelming nausea, the moment of weakness, of vulnerability, when her body betrayed her. And then the vivid image of Edgar, the raven, landing there, his black eyes fixed on the object she had just expelled. He wasn't just an animal. He was a herald, a judge, an executioner. He had been the instrument of her downfall, the messenger of a truth she thought she had buried in the depths of her own being. The legend of the raven that unearths secrets had become her cruelest reality. Shame was a heavy, suffocating cloak, denser than any fabric, colder than any metal. She felt naked, exposed. Every flaw of her character, every act of betrayal, now on display for the entire world. The forensic analysis would confirm the key's authenticity, its undeniable connection to the vault where the prototype was hidden. And then, the prototype. The treasure she had buried, the future she had stolen, would be unearthed, exposed, and with it, the full extent of her betrayal. When the call to return to the courtroom finally came, the officer's voice sounded like the blast of an apocalyptic trumpet. Every step back into the courtroom was a monumental effort, as if her feet were encased in lead. The stairs, hundreds of them, the reporters, the curious, the lawyers, everyone saw her not as Dr. Clara Vasconcelos, the brilliant mind behind Vancetech, but as the woman who swallowed a key and vomited it, only for it to be retrieved by a raven. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was even denser, charged with an almost palpable expectation. Judge Almeida was back in her seat, her expression now grave, but firm. The prosecutor, Dr. Mendes, displayed a contained satisfaction, a glint in his eyes that Clara recognized as the anticipation of victory. And Arthur, the trainer, was there, Edgar perched on his shoulder, a dark and imposing silhouette. Their eyes met again. This time, there was no sadness, only a silent resignation, as if he knew that truth, though necessary, was not always beautiful. Edgar tilted his head, an almost human gesture, as if bidding farewell to a lost soul. Judge Almeida's voice cut through the heavy silence of the courtroom. "Dr. Clara Vasconcelos, please take the witness stand." The words echoed, sealing her fate. Clara's legs, still trembling, barely supported her as she walked to the center of the room, to the stand where her truth would be laid bare. The world spun, but she was motionless, petrified at the center of her own disaster. She sat down, her heart beating erratically against her ribs, her gaze fixed on the judge. The prosecutor approached, the key now in an evidence bag, visible to all. He looked at her, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "Dr. Vasconcelos," he began, his voice calm and controlled, "in light of the evidence presented and the imminent forensic confirmation, the court expects your cooperation. Could you please tell us, where exactly is the prototype buried?" The question hung in the air, a suspended guillotine blade awaiting her neck. Clara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, the thin air become non-existent. The prosecutor's voice, once calm and controlled, now seemed a distant thunder, reverberating in the bones of her skull. Where exactly is the prototype buried? The question was a final blow, a merciless checkmate. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. The key, gleaming within the evidence bag, was irrefutable proof of her guilt, a macabre beacon illuminating all her lies. Her mind raced, a frantic search for an escape route that simply didn't exist. Every carefully constructed lie, every alibi, every plausible denial crumbled like a house of cards under the force of that question. She looked at Dr. Silva, her lawyer, who now seemed as defeated as she, his eyes fixed on the table, lacking the courage to face her. There was no strategy, no legal maneuver that could save her now. Truth, raw and stark, was there, hovering over her like a storm cloud, and she was its epicenter. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the frantic clicks of cameras and the muffled scribbling of reporters. Every eye was on her, waiting for the confession, waiting for the final act of her tragedy. She felt the weight of history, the weight of betrayal, the weight of her own inordinate ambition. Vanstech, the empire she had helped build, was now crumbling around her, and she was the architect of her own destruction. Her gaze drifted involuntarily to Arthur. He stood there, motionless, a statue of resignation. And Edgar, the raven on his shoulder, a dark shadow against Arthur's light shirt, his black eyes fixed on her, unblinking. There was no triumph, no anger, only a cold, deep observation. It was as if the raven, the herald of truth, was merely confirming what he already knew, what he had helped reveal. The legend of the raven that unearthed secrets had become her cruelest reality. Clara's throat was dry, scratchy, as if she had swallowed sand. She tried to speak, but the words refused to come out, caught in a knot of shame and despair. Sweat trickled down her back, an icy river marking the end of her resistance. She tasted the bitter flavor of defeat, a metallic taste that filled her mouth. Judge Almeida, sensing her struggle, intervened, her voice firm, but not cruel. Dr. Vasconcelos, the court awaits your answer. Your cooperation at this moment may be taken into consideration. Cooperation, the word echoed, a last thread of dignity she might try to grasp. But what dignity remained? She had been unmasked, publicly humiliated. What more did she have to lose? The facade of control, the persona of an unshakable woman, had completely disintegrated. The image of the prototype came to her mind, the elegant device, the embodiment of years of work, of dreams, of sacrifices. The power it represented, the fortune it promised. She had risked everything for it, and now everything was lost. Ambition, once a driving force, was now a poison running through her veins. She took a deep breath, a trembling sigh that seemed to tear the air. Her eyes, once full of defiance, were now watery, reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and deep pain. Her resistance broke. The wall she had built around herself, brick by brick of lies and dissimulation, finally gave way. "It's," she began, her voice a hoarse whisper almost inaudible. "It's buried." She paused, swallowing hard, the word buried sounding grotesque, an echo of her own betrayal. The prosecutor leaned in slightly, waiting, the tension in the courtroom reaching an unbearable peak. "Yes, Dr. Vasconcelos. Continue." His voice was soft, but laden with relentless authority. Clara closed her eyes for an instant, as if to prepare for the final plunge into the abyss. The image of the location, so vivid in her mind, now projected outwards, to the courtroom, to the world. The smell of damp earth, the sound of the shovel, the sweat on her brow under the moonlight. That moment of desperation and hope now transformed into her final judgment. It's buried on the grounds of the old Vance textile factory, in the back, near the wall bordering the river, under the large oak tree. There's a small concrete structure, almost covered by vegetation. The vault is there, about 2 meters deep. The words flowed out in a continuous stream, a torrent of confession that seemed to liberate and, at the same time, condemn. Every detail, every reference point was a nail in her own coffin. The momentary relief of being rid of the burden of lies was immediately replaced by an overwhelming wave of despair. She had spoken. The truth, so carefully hidden, so violently defended, was now exposed for all. A murmur of shock swept through the courtroom. Reporters began to scribble frantically, some even rising in their seats, shocked by the frankness of the confession. The prosecutor, Dr. Mendez, nodded slowly, an expression of veiled triumph on his face. He had succeeded. The truth had been unearthed, not just from the ground, but from the traitor's own mouth. Judge Almeida struck the gavel, restoring order. "Silence! Silence in the court!" Her voice, though firm, carried a tone of gravity, of sorrow. She looked at Clara, not with anger, but with a dark understanding of the human tragedy unfolding before her. "Dr. Mendez," the judge continued, "the court will take note of Dr. Vasconcelos's confession. I request that a forensic team be dispatched immediately to the indicated location. We need to confirm the existence of the prototype and its recovery." Clara no longer heard. Her head spun, the sound of the gavel echoing like a funeral bell. She had lost everything. Her career, her reputation, her freedom. Ambition had blinded her, greed had consumed her, and a raven, a simple raven, had been the herald of her ruin. She raised her eyes one last time, seeking Arthur, seeking Edgar. Arthur still watched her, the same sadness in his eyes. And Edgar, the raven, tilted his head again, as if observing Clara's soul, bidding farewell to her body, to her life as she knew it. The legend of the raven that unearthed secrets had been fulfilled, and Clara's deepest secret, the one she thought she had buried forever, was now at the mercy of the world. Silence returned, but this time it was a heavy silence, laden with the weight of a devastating truth. A truth that had been torn from the depths, not of the earth, but of a lost soul. The silence that followed Dr. Vasconcelos's confession was not one of peace, but of a deafening vacuum, the kind of silence that precedes a disaster. Clara's words, once trapped, now echoed in the corners of the courtroom, each syllable a hammer striking her own tombstone. She had handed over the treasure map, but the treasure was her own ruin. The prosecutor, Dr. Mendez, allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile, the gesture of a hunter finally cornering his prey. Judge Almeida, with a seriousness that weighed in the air, gave her orders. The machinery of justice, slow and relentless, was now in accelerated motion. For Clara, the outside world seemed to dissolve. The murmurs of reporters, the flashes of cameras, the agitation of lawyers, everything transformed into a distant hum, a white noise that filled the void in her mind. She was trapped in a bubble of despair, observing the collapse of her life from afar. Arthur's gaze, still fixed on her, was no longer one of sadness, but of resigned compassion, like one watching a soul irrevocably lost. And Edgar, the raven on Arthur's shoulder, remained motionless, a dark guardian of truth, his obsidian black eyes witnessing the final act of the tragedy. As the court prepared for the next step, a forensic team was already being mobilized. Prosecutor Mendez, with an air of urgency, made the necessary arrangements. Within minutes, the news spread beyond the courtroom walls, reaching the streets, news outlets, social media. Dr. Clara Vasconcelos, the brilliant mind of Vance Tech, the woman who promised to revolutionize technology, was now the confessed traitor, the thief who buried her own ambition. The scene shifted not physically for Clara, but through the narrative's lens, to the abandoned grounds of the old Vance textile factory, a place forgotten by time, where nature was beginning to reclaim what was once man's. The sunlight, now lower in the sky, cast long, distorted shadows over the rusted ruins and dense vegetation. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and the mold of decades of abandonment. Soon, police cars and forensic vehicles invaded the quietude of the location. Lights flashed, sirens were turned off, and a team of specialists equipped with shovels, metal detectors, and excavation gear disembarked. The location indicated by Clara was precise. The back of the grounds, near the wall bordering the river under the large oak tree. The concrete structure, almost swallowed by ivy and moss, was an unmistakable landmark. The tension was palpable in the cold, late afternoon air. Every team member knew the importance of that moment. It wasn't just the recovery of an object, but the confirmation of a confession, the resolution of a legal drama that had captured the nation's attention. Journalists who had followed the convoy maintained a respectful distance, but their cameras and microphones were ready to capture every detail. Shovels began to cut into the earth, the muffled, rhythmic sound echoing in the silence of the abandoned factory. The earth, compacted and damp, yielded slowly. With each strike, anticipation grew. The smell of wet earth and exposed roots filled the air. The experts worked with precision, carefully removing layers of soil, aware that they were dealing with crucial evidence. 1 meter deep, 2 meters, muscles strained, sweat trickled. The light began to fade and floodlights were set up, illuminating the excavation area with an artificial, dramatic glow. Then a different sound, not the sound of the shovel cutting earth, but a hollow, metallic clunk. One of the experts stopped. His breath held. "I think we've found something." His voice, previously hoarse from effort, was now an excited whisper. With even more care, the surrounding earth was removed. Slowly, the shape of a metal vault emerged from the darkness of the soil. It was a small, robust vault, showing signs of having been buried for some time, its surface stained with earth and moisture. A murmur of excitement swept through the team and the journalists. The confirmation, the irrefutable proof. One of the technicians wearing gloves examined the vault. "It's it," he murmured, his voice full of admiration and relief. "The seal is intact." The master key, the one Edgar had delivered to the judge, was the only way to open it. Back at the courthouse, the news arrived like lightning. An officer entered hastily, whispering to the prosecutor, who nodded with a contained smile. Dr. Mendez turned to Judge Almeida, an expression of veiled triumph on his face. "Your Honor, we have just received confirmation. The prototype was found at the exact location indicated by Dr. Vasconcelos. The vault is being transported here to be opened in the presence of the court." The words fell upon Clara like stones. She didn't need to see, she knew. The image of the vault, now unearthed, was as vivid in her mind as the day she buried it. That moment of desperation and hope now transformed into her final judgment. The last barrier had fallen. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. Her truth was exposed, raw and cold, for the entire world to see. She felt a deep emptiness, an exhaustion that went beyond the physical. The ambition that drove her, the greed that blinded her, everything had turned to ashes. Vance Tech, her creation, her empire, was now a monument to her own downfall. She looked at Arthur one last time. He was still there, Edgar on his shoulder, a dark and imposing silhouette. The Raven tilted his head, his black eyes fixed on her, unblinking. It was as if he was watching Clara's soul bid farewell to her body, to her life as she knew it. The legend of the Raven that unearthed secrets had been fulfilled, And Clara's deepest secret, the one she thought she had buried forever, was now at the mercy of the world. Silence returned, but this time it was a heavy silence, laden with the weight of a devastating truth, a truth that had been torn from the depths, not of the earth, but of a lost soul. The judge's gavel sounded again, a final sound, a verdict even before the sentence. The wait for the vault was a torturous eternity for Clara. Each tick-tock of the courtroom clock seemed amplified, echoing the irregular beat of her own heart. The murmurs in the courtroom had subsided, replaced by an almost palpable expectation. All eyes were fixed on the doors, awaiting the arrival of the final proof. Then the doors opened. Two officers with serious expressions entered, carrying a heavy rectangular object covered by a dark cloth. The muffled sound of their footsteps and the dragging of the object across the marble floor of the hallway were the only audible noises. They placed the vault on an auxiliary table, hastily set up in the center of the room, next to the judge's dais. The cloth was removed with a dramatic flourish, revealing the metal vault, dirty with earth and moisture, exactly as Clara had imagined it. It was small, but it seemed to carry the weight of her entire future. A collective gasp of shock and awe swept through the room. Camera flashes exploded, illuminating the vault like an ancient relic unearthed. Prosecutor Mendes, with a smile that could no longer be contained, approached the table. "Your Honor," he declared, his voice resonating with authority. "The Vanstech prototype has been recovered, as per Dr. Vasconcelos's confession. This is the vault that contains it." Judge Almeida, with a penetrating gaze, nodded. She picked up the small metal key that Edgar had left in her lap, holding it between her thumb and forefinger. The key, once a mysterious and enigmatic object, was now the tool that would seal Clara's fate. "Dr. Mendes," she said, her voice grave, "proceed with the opening of the vault in the presence of the court." The prosecutor reached out to receive the key. His fingers brushed the judge's, an almost ceremonial gesture. He turned to the vault, the key gleaming under the courtroom lights. Clara watched, paralyzed. It was like watching a slow-motion film of her own destruction. Every movement of the prosecutor, every gesture was a blow to her soul. The key was inserted into the lock with a soft, definitive click. The sound, though small, reverberated throughout the courtroom, a sound of doors closing forever. The prosecutor turned the key. A mechanical clunk, louder this time, indicated the mechanism had been unlocked. He pulled the vault's handle, and the lid opened slowly, revealing the dark interior. Everyone leaned forward, breath held. Reporters stretched, trying to get the best shot. Inside the vault, nestled in a bed of protective foam, there it was, the prototype. It wasn't a grand or flashy object, but an elegant and compact piece of engineering made of polished metal alloys and complex circuits, with a soft blue light pulsing at its center, even when off. It was the core, the essence of the clean energy technology that Clara and Arthur had dreamed of creating. The prosecutor carefully removed it from the vault, holding it with reverence. The blue light pulsed softly, like a beating heart. "Here it is, Your Honor," he announced, raising the prototype for all to see. "The irrefutable proof, the future of Vanstech, stolen and buried." A murmur of astonishment and indignation swept through the courtroom. The sight of the prototype, so real and tangible, confirmed the magnitude of the crime. Clara felt a chill run down her spine, a chill that didn't come from the air conditioning, but from complete and utter ruin. She had lost. There were no more doubts, no more hope. The prototype, the materialization of her ambition and betrayal, was there, exposed for the entire world to see. Her gaze drifted from the prototype and found Arthur. He stood motionless, with Edgar still perched on his shoulder. In Arthur's eyes, Clara saw no anger, but a deep sadness, almost a mourning. And Edgar, the raven, tilted his head, his black eyes fixed on her, as if watching Clara's soul bid farewell to her body, to her life as she knew it. The legend of the raven that unearthed secrets had been fulfilled, and Clara's deepest secret, the one she thought she had buried forever, was now at the mercy of the world. Silence returned, but this time it was a heavy silence, laden with the weight of a devastating truth, a truth that had been torn from the depths, not of the earth, but of a lost soul. The judge's gavel sounded again, a final sound, a verdict even before the sentence. Clara Vasconcelos's fate was sealed. The echo of Judge Almeida's gavel resonated through the courtroom, a dry, definitive sound that seemed to break the very fabric of reality. For Clara, it wasn't just a verdict, but the sound of her world imploding, of every pillar she had built on ambition and lies crumbling into a cloud of dust and regret. I saw the moment the last barrier in her soul gave way. Her shoulders dropped, her posture, once rigid, now slumped under the weight of an irrefutable truth. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. There was only an emptiness in her eyes, a cold, paralyzing acceptance of her fate. It was the gaze of someone who had lost everything and who knew there was nothing left to lose. The judge, with the gravity the moment demanded, raised her voice, cutting through the murmur that was beginning to form. In light of the irrefutable evidence presented, including the defendant's confession and the recovery of the VanceTech prototype at the exact location she indicated, this court finds Dr. Clara Vasconcelos guilty of the charges of theft, fraud, and breach of trust. The words fell like death sentences. There was no more room for doubt, for flimsy defenses, for the hope of a miracle. Justice, slow and relentless, had finally arrived. Prosecutor Mendez, with a contained but visible smile of satisfaction, turned to the press. "Justice has been served," he declared, his voice firm and victorious. VanceTech, a company representing the future of innovation and clean energy, will have its prototype returned and can move forward. This case is proof that truth, however buried, always finds its way to light. As camera flashes exploded in a symphony of lights and reporters jostled to capture every word, every expression, my eyes fixed on Arthur. He remained standing, a statue of pain and relief. There was no triumph on his face, only a deep sadness, almost a mourning. It was mourning for a lost partnership, for a betrayed friendship, for a dream that had been forever stained. Edgar, the raven, was still on his shoulder, a silent and omniscient presence. His black eyes, once so curious and keen, now seemed to observe the unfolding of a Greek tragedy, the climax of a drama that he, in his peculiar way, had helped orchestrate. I saw Arthur raise his hand and gently stroke Edgar's dark feathers. The raven tilted his head, a gesture of silent understanding. It was as if Edgar was saying, "My part is done. The secret has been unearthed." Two officers approached Clara, their expressions impassive. She did not resist. There was no more strength, no will. Her eyes, once full of fire and ambition, were now empty, fixed on a distant point, as if she were already elsewhere, in a future she knew to be bleak and solitary. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, the murmur of the crowd intensified, transforming into an indistinct hum. The stares of condemnation, the whispers of disapproval, all blended into a whirlwind that swallowed her. I watched Clara walk away, her silhouette diminishing as the courtroom doors closed behind her. It was the end of an era for Clara Vasconcelos, the end of her freedom, her reputation, of everything she had valued. VanceTech, which she had dreamed of leading alone, would now move forward without her, a bitter reminder of her downfall. The prototype, the core that pulsed with a soft blue light, was carefully placed back in the vault and taken into custody. A symbol of hope recovered, but also of broken trust. The courtroom began to empty, but the energy of the moment remained. hovering in the air like a ghost. Conversations were animated, journalists rushed to transmit the news, and the story of Clara Vasconcelos and the Raven Edgar would spread like wildfire, forever etched in the annals of justice and legend. Arthur remained for a while longer, alone on the bench, with Edgar still on his shoulder. He looked at the spot where Clara had been, an expression of melancholy on his face. I wondered what was going through his mind. Relief, vengeance, or just the deep sadness of seeing a shared dream turn into a nightmare of betrayal. Edgar, as if sensing his mission was complete, spread his dark, powerful wings. With a single impulse, he launched himself from Arthur's shoulder, flying in a graceful arc over the heads of the few who still remained in the courtroom. He passed through one of the large windows, his black feathers reflecting the light of the setting sun, and disappeared into the vastness of the blue sky. His work was done. The raven that unearthed secrets had fulfilled its legend, and the truth finally had been revealed. Arthur stood there, alone, looking at the emptiness where Edgar had been. The silence that followed was different from the heavy silence before. It was a silence of conclusion, of a chapter closing, but one that left deep scars. The story of Clara Vasconcelos was a grim reminder of how ambition can corrode the soul, and how sometimes justice can come from the most unexpected sources. Clara's fate was sealed, and the world now awaited the next act. The silence that settled in the courtroom after Clara's departure and Edgar's ascent to the skies was not a silence of peace. It was the heavy silence that follows a storm, where the debris still smolders and the dust has not yet settled. Arthur remained there, a solitary figure on the bench, the echo of the judge's words still resonating in his ears. Guilty, the word, so definitive, carried with it a strange mixture of relief and desolation. There was no joy in victory. Clara's betrayal had torn not just a contract, but the fabric of a friendship, of a shared dream. The core, now secure, was a constant reminder of what had been lost. Arthur felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, not just the weight of Vance Tech, but the weight of responsibility for a technology that could change the planet and that had almost been corrupted by inordinate ambition. The few journalists who still remained in the room cast curious glances at Arthur, expecting a statement, an emotion he couldn't express. He was not a man of grand public speeches, and the pain he felt was too intimate to be exposed to flashes and microphones. He just wanted silence, the chance to process everything that had happened. The story of Edgar, the Raven, was already spreading like a virus. Newspaper headlines, breaking news, social media, everyone was talking about the Raven of Justice, the bird that unearthed the truth. The legend had become reality, and the world was fascinated. Scientists, ornithologists, mystics, everyone tried to make sense of the inexplicable. How could an animal have acted with such precision, such purpose? It was a mystery that defied logic, and that added an almost mythical layer to Vance Tech's already dramatic saga. Arthur knew that the recovery of the prototype was just the first step. Vance Tech needed to be rebuilt. Investor confidence, team morale, the company's very reputation. Everything had been shaken. He would have to face an arduous battle to restore what Clara had tried to destroy. But unlike before, he was not alone. He had the core, the proof of his work, and the memory of what he and Clara could have been. As Arthur finally rose to leave, Prosecutor Mendez approached, extending his hand. "Dr. Vance," he said, his tone softer now. "My congratulations. Justice prevailed, and the world owes much to you and to your winged friend." There was a glint of admiration in the prosecutor's eyes, a mixture of respect for science and the inexplicable. Arthur shook Mendez's hand, a nod of thanks. "Thank you, Dr. Mendez," he replied, his voice hoarse. "But the fight isn't over yet. VanceTech has a future to build. Upon leaving the courtroom, Arthur was immediately surrounded by a crowd of reporters. Microphones were thrust in his direction, cameras flashed incessantly. "Dr. Vance, how do you feel? What is the future of VanceTech? What do you have to say about Edgar the Raven?" The questions tumbled over each other, a cacophony of eager voices. He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and looked up at the blue sky where Edgar had disappeared. "Today," he began, his voice surprisingly firm, "justice has been served. The VanceTech prototype, the core, is safe. This technology has the potential to revolutionize clean energy and change the world for the better." He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd. VanceTech will move forward, stronger than ever, dedicated to innovation and integrity. And as for Edgar, a small, sad smile touched his lips. Edgar reminded us that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to come to light, and that sometimes wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources. His words were met with a fresh frenzy of flashes and murmurs. He didn't linger, letting his statement speak for itself. As he walked away, the image of Clara being escorted came to his mind. He wondered if she felt any remorse, any understanding of the magnitude of her downfall, or if ambition still blinded her, even in the darkness of her new reality. In the days that followed, the story of VanceTech and Edgar the Raven dominated global news. The core was examined by experts, its technology confirmed as revolutionary. VanceTech received a flood of support and investments, eager to be part of what promised to be the next great technological revolution. Arthur suddenly found himself not just a scientist, but a symbol of resilience and integrity. But despite all the success and recognition, a shadow remained. The shadow of betrayal, of lost friendship, and the shadow of a raven who, with a simple gesture, had changed the course of history, leaving behind a legacy of mystery and an unforgettable lesson about the nature of truth. The world looked to the future, to the promise of clean energy, but would not forget the price paid, nor the unlikely messenger who revealed it. The chapter of betrayal had closed, but the book of VanceTech and Arthur Vance was only just beginning to be written anew, on brighter pages, but still marked by the scars of the past. The night air, crisp and biting, was a welcome relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the courtroom. The flashing lights still flickered in my retina, and the hum of reporters' voices echoed in my ears. I moved away from the crowd, the feeling of being watched still pursuing me, like a persistent shadow. A discreet car waited, and I got in, sinking into the leather seat, feeling the exhaustion of days, perhaps weeks, of accumulated tension. The driver pulled away smoothly, and the outside world, with its frenzy of news and speculation, began to recede, blurring into streaks of light and sound. I gazed out the window, the city streets passing like a silent film. The silence inside the car was a balm, allowing my own thoughts, previously muffled by the cacophony, to finally surface. The image of Clara being escorted was still vivid in my mind. There was no triumph in my heart, only a deep melancholy. VanceTech had been saved, the core recovered, but at a cost I was still processing. Clara's betrayal wasn't just a blow to business, it was a personal wound, a bitter reminder of the fragility of trust. In the days that followed, the world seemed to spin at a dizzying speed. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. They were investors, partners, journalists, even politicians, all wanting a piece of the story, a slice of VanceTech's future. Headlines were omnipresent. The Raven of Justice, the fall of the tech queen, VanceTech rises from the ashes. Edgar had become an instant legend, a global phenomenon. Ornithologists debated his intelligence, mystics spoke of omens, and the internet exploded with theories and memes. For me, he was simply Edgar, the unlikely friend who had seen the truth when everyone else was blind. The first meeting at Vance Tech, after the verdict, was a mixture of relief and apprehension. Employees, previously disheartened and uncertain about the future, now had a glimmer of hope in their eyes. But the atmosphere was still fragile. Trust had been shaken, and the shadow of Clara's betrayal hung over the corridors she had once walked with such authority. I found myself in a new role, not just the visionary scientist, but the leader who needed to inspire, rebuild, and heal. It was an overwhelming responsibility, but I knew I couldn't fail. The core was more than technology. It was a symbol of hope for a world crying out for solutions. The prototype was brought back to Vance Tech's laboratories under heavy security. Seeing it again, pulsing with its soft blue light, was like reuniting with an old friend. But now it carried with it the story of its near loss, the scar of inordinate ambition. My team and I plunged into work with renewed energy, but also with newfound caution. Every line of code, every component, was reviewed with even greater rigor. Integrity became the watchword, a constant reminder of what we had lost and what we were determined to protect. Meanwhile, news about Clara was scarce, but relentless. She was detained, awaiting the legal process that would follow. Her reputation, built with years of work and cunning, had crumbled in a single day. I wondered if, in her cold cell, she finally understood the magnitude of her choice, the emptiness her ambition had created, or if she still clung to some distorted justification, blind to the reality of her fall. There was no room for vengeance in my heart, only a silent sadness for the woman she had been and the woman she had become. Vance Tech's reconstruction wasn't just about technology, it was about people. I spent hours talking to employees, listening to their concerns, reaffirming my commitment to the company's original vision. Meetings with investors were constant, and Edgar's story, however surreal, paradoxically, brought a layer of authenticity and fascination to our narrative. We were the company saved by a raven, the company that had faced betrayal and emerged stronger. It was a story of resilience, and the world was ready to hear it. I felt the weight of the future on my shoulders. The promise of the core was immense, and expectations were stratospheric. But, unlike before, I didn't feel alone. The team was united, investors, though cautious, were on board, and the memory of Edgar, the raven who unearthed the truth, was a constant reminder that, even in the darkest hours, hope can emerge from the most unexpected sources. The chapter of betrayal had closed, but the book of Vance Tech and Arthur Vance was only just beginning to be written anew, on brighter pages, but still marked by the scars of the past. The journey would be long and arduous, but truth, once revealed, was an unshakable force, and I was ready to lead the way. The next step was monumental. The large-scale testing phase. No longer in the lab, but in a real controlled environment, with all eyes of the world turned towards us. The pressure was palpable, a heavy cloak hanging over every engineer, every scientist. We knew that any failure, however small, would be amplified, distorted, perhaps even used by those who still doubted or envied us. The master key that Edgar delivered to the judge not only opened a vault, but unlocked a Pandora's box of expectations and scrutiny. We couldn't fail. The future of Vance Tech, and perhaps the future of clean energy, depended on it. We chose a remote location in the heart of the Nevada desert, a decommissioned research complex that offered the necessary security and isolation. We transformed the place into a sanctuary of innovation, with monitoring towers, underground bunkers, and a security team that rivaled that of a military base. Construction took months, every detail planned with a surgeon's precision. I was there, supervising, feeling the sand beneath my boots and the merciless sun on my skin, a constant reminder of the vastness of the challenge ahead. The day of the final test arrived like an impending storm. The air was charged not only with the desert's static electricity, but with the tension of hundreds of focused minds. Journalists from around the world were confined to a safe observation area, kilometers away, their telescopes and cameras pointed at the heart of our complex. Politicians, investors, and even rival scientists were watching from their offices, awaiting the result that could redefine the global energy landscape. I found myself in the main control room, a labyrinth of flickering screens and complex consoles. Beside me, my team, their faces marked by fatigue, but with a glint of determination in their eyes. The image of the core filled the central screen, its soft blue glow, now more intense, pulsing like an alien heart. It was the culmination of years of work, of sacrifices, of an unshakable faith in a vision, and ironically, of a betrayal that almost destroyed us. System status. My voice sounded firmer than I felt. All parameters green, Arthur, replied Sarah, our chief engineer, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. Ready for activation sequence. A heavy silence fell over the room. One could hear the hum of computers, the sound of one's own breath. I closed my eyes for an instant. The image of Edgar, the raven, flying over the courtroom, the key in his beak, passing through my mind. He had given us a second chance. We couldn't waste it. Initiate sequence, I ordered, opening my eyes. The monitors came alive with cascading graphs and numbers. The core began to vibrate, a low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate in my bones. The blue light intensified, filling the containment dome with an ethereal glow. My team watched every reading, every fluctuation, their faces tense. Suddenly, a sharp alarm broke the silence. A red light flashed on one of the monitors. "Energy flow anomaly!" shouted one of the technicians. "Overload spikes in the secondary reactor." My heart leaped. It was every scientist's nightmare. The moment when years of work could dissipate into smoke. My mind raced to Clara, to her sabotage, to the fragility of everything we had built. Was this a miscalculation, a structural failure, or a seed of destruction planted by her that was only now manifesting? "Contain the spikes, redirect the load," I shouted, my voice echoing with urgency. "Sarah, check the magnetic field isolation." The team worked in a coordinated frenzy, their movements precise and swift. The alarm continued to blare, a strident reminder of the impending catastrophe. I could feel sweat trickling down my forehead, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. The world was watching, and we were on the brink of an abyss. Redirection in progress. Magnetic field stabilizing. Voices overlapped, each a small victory against the chaos. Seconds stretched into hours. The red light flickered, dimmed, and finally extinguished, the alarm silenced. A collective sigh of relief filled the room. The core continued to glow, its pulsation now regular and strong. "Spikes contained, secondary reactor stabilized," Sarah announced, her voice still a little shaky but with a relieved smile. It seems it was an unexpected fluctuation in the initial resonance. Our safety protocols worked perfectly. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't a failure, but a test, proof that Vanstech was stronger, more resilient than ever. The scar of betrayal had taught us to be more cautious, more meticulous, and that caution had saved us. The test continued without further incident. The core operated with impressive efficiency, generating clean energy on a scale that defied expectations. The incoming data was spectacular, confirming every theory, every calculation. Outside, the journalists who had captured the moment of tension now filmed the spectacle of light and energy, their headlines already forming in their minds. When the initial phase of the test was successfully completed, applause erupted in the control room, hugs and smiles, tears of relief. I allowed myself a moment to absorb everything, exhaustion mixing with profound euphoria. The journey wasn't over, of course. There were still many challenges ahead. commercialization, global implementation, political and economic battles. But we had proven the impossible. I looked at the screen, at the constant glow of the core. It wasn't just a machine. It was a testament to human resilience, to the ability to overcome adversity, and to an unshakable belief in truth. And, somewhere, I knew Edgar the Raven was watching, his work done, his message delivered. Truth, after all, always finds a way to light. And we, at Vanstech, were ready to illuminate the world with it. The applause in the control room echoed like thunder, a cathartic sound that swept away months of tension, sleepless nights, and the persistent shadow of betrayal. Tight hugs, smiles bordering on tears, the euphoria was palpable, almost electric. I found myself at the center of it all, exhausted, but with a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just technical success, it was the validation of a vision, proof that integrity, however tested, would always find its way. Outside, the Nevada desert, once a landscape of secrecy and speculation, now radiated new hope. Journalists who had witnessed the brief but intense failure and subsequent recovery were in a frenzy. Their reports, broadcast live to millions, spoke not just of new technology, but of a saga of resilience. Vanstech was no longer just a company, it was a symbol. In the days that followed, the world opened up to us. Headlines screamed about the Vanstech revolution, the dawn of clean energy. The company's stock soared. Investors who had once hesitated now knocked on our door, eager to be part of history. But for me, the true triumph wasn't in the numbers, but in the unity of my team. They had faced adversity, doubt, relentless pressure, and emerged stronger, more cohesive. The testing phase was extended, data analyzed and reanalyzed, and every result confirmed what we already knew. The core was real. It was efficient, safe, and above all, scalable. The future of clean energy was no longer a distant chimera. It was within our reach. As Vanstech prepared for an unprecedented global expansion, news about Clara finally reached a conclusion. The trial was swift, merciless. The evidence was irrefutable. The master key, the buried prototype, the financial records that exposed her intent to sell. She was convicted of theft, fraud, and sabotage. In her last public appearance, her face was marked not by anger, but by a cold resignation, an emptiness that made me feel a pang of sadness. Ambition had consumed her completely, leaving behind only the ashes of a promising life. There was no triumph in her downfall, only the bitter realization of wasted potential. Edgar, the Raven, became a legend within Vanstech. His story, told and retold, was a constant reminder that truth, however buried, would always find a messenger. I had a small bronze statue of a raven perched on a key, commissioned and discreetly placed in the main lobby of our new headquarters. Not to glorify betrayal, but to honor the unexpected intervention that saved us. Edgar never appeared again in court nor in my office, but I saw him in every sunrise, in every shadow dancing at the window, a silent guardian of truth. The challenges, of course, were far from over. The global commercialization of the core was a monumental undertaking, requiring negotiations with governments, overcoming established energy lobbies, and building an infrastructure spanning continents. The pressure was immense, but now it was a different kind of pressure. It wasn't the pressure of fear of failure, but the pressure of responsibility, of the promise of a better future. I became a different kind of leader. The scar of betrayal taught me to be more cautious, yes, but also more empathetic, more people-focused. Vanstech wasn't just about technology, it was about the community that built it, about the impact it would have on billions of lives. I began to dedicate more time to mentoring young talent, to listening to the concerns of each team member, to ensuring that the company's culture was built on the solid foundation of integrity and collaboration. The core began to be implemented in pilot projects around the world, transforming communities, bringing clean and accessible energy to places that once lived in darkness. Seeing the blue glow of energy in remote villages, in cities struggling with pollution, was the greatest reward. It was the materialization of a dream that, for a time, seemed lost. Looking back to the day Edgar dropped that key into my lap, I realized it wasn't just an event that changed the course of a trial. It was the catalyst for a much larger transformation. It was the moment when truth, in its most unexpected form, freed us to fulfill our true purpose. VanceTech's journey was only just beginning, but the foundations were now unshakable, built on resilience, innovation, and the belief that, no matter how dark the night, the light of truth will always find a way to shine. And we, with Edgar's legacy in our hearts, were ready to illuminate the world with it. The future was not just bright, it was clean, sustainable, and finally ours to build.